I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, Bryce. How are you?
Good. Caroline, I have to ask you, did you happen to go check out the An Evening with Monica Lewinsky last week?
You know, I ended up not being able to go, but I heard fabulous things about it. Twitter looked like there was really good engagement on the event, and I heard great things from people who did go.
Yeah, it was an awesome event. I know we had talked about it the last couple episodes, and it was definitely one of my. I've worked actually, it's funny. Caroline and I think I've mentioned this before. We actually did me and you organized like the very first Forward Thinking Speaker Series event together. But this is probably one of my favorite ones that I think we've done. Got to, be in contact with Monica Lewinsky while she was here, and she was just as awesome behind the scenes as she was like on stage, just very down to earth and an incredible person. So yeah, we just want to thank everybody who had a chance to come out and join us last week or a couple of weeks ago and now. And we hope everybody enjoyed the event, and we're already working on speakers for next year.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Yeah, I've got one really pretty big name lined up already, and I can't wait for us to announce it here in the next couple of months. But there's so much happening right now in the library world. And today, we were taking a look at episode ideas, and we always try to, when we come up with episode ideas, we always try to kind of time it with either it's like pop culture anniversaries or, is there something happening that, in the news that people are talking about. And right now, as we're recording this, the movie Blonde, the Netflix movie Blonde, of course, very loosely based on the life of Marilyn Monroe, is out now. So a lot of people have been talking about Marilyn Monroe, and we're like, you know what? We got lots of Marilyn Monroe stuff in our collection. So let's chat a little bit about Marilyn today, right?
It's interesting. When I was putting this together, I was looking back at some of our older episodes, and we don't actually often focus on just a single person. I think some of the other ones, we did an episode on the Muppets, and that was almost kind of the closest to having a single person focus, but there's definitely a lot to talk about, a lot that has been talked about in Marilyn Monroe's life, and just a chance for us to talk a little bit about what EPL has and how people can access some of her movies.
Yeah, we each watched a Marilyn, not just Blonde, but we also just each watched an actual Marilyn Monroe movie. I watched mine on the weekend, and this was my very first Marilyn Monroe movie. So we're each gonna give a review of one of Marilyn's movies that you can borrow from us, and give our thoughts on the controversial movie Blonde. But before we talk all about Marilyn Monroe, Caroline, we love getting feedback from, well, not just feedback, like we love getting feedback from listeners, but occasionally we also tend to pop up on some best of podcast lists. And we were mentioned in another one last week, weren't we?
Yes, you shared this with me, and I was so thrilled to see it. I was loving the love that we got from the Nate Nugget, which I have to say I wasn't too familiar with, but definitely now one of my favorite publications.
Yeah, so they put us on their list. I can't say the full name, but they put us on their list as a podcast to get your S together. Basically, they mentioned that obviously Overdue Finds is conversations from the Edmonton Public Library about books, movies, music, and pop culture through a local perspective. And what was really cool about being mentioned on this list is this wasn't just local podcasts that were mentioned, which is always still great to be mentioned with, but they also recommended podcasts by Brené Brown, Seth Rogen, and NPR. So that's quite the quite the list for us to be included on. So thank you so much, Nate.
Yes, thank you, Nate. I do think the locals perspective is interesting. I mean, that's something that I think about a lot when we are doing things at the library around, in whether it's our collection or programs or services. Why is this something that's important to people in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada in 2022? And I think thinking about even things like our a conspiracy political thriller episode. How many other podcasts would talk about that and mention the Talus Dome in the same episode?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's
Yeah.
that local content that you get from two people who are not from Edmonton, but seem to be now. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also too, it's interesting to see, like, obviously we also get a large number of listeners from outside of not only Edmonton but like Canada as well. So it's really cool that people still they'll listen to us give our take on different pop culture tidbits with a little bit of a Edmonton connection to them. So yeah, just thank you so much for everybody who listens, and yeah, thanks Nate for including us on that list, which was awesome. All right, so before we get talking all about Marilyn Monroe, let's chat about our recent Overdue finds picks. Caroline, besides Blonde,
Yeah.
what have you been enjoying lately?
So before diving into Marilyn movies, I wanted to watch the 1992 animated feature FernGully, The Last Rainforest. Now, this was a movie I was pretty sure that I had seen, and I got about 5-10 minutes into the movie and realized, no, this is all brand new for me. And if you've seen it, there's a lot in there that you would just remember, whether it's Robin Williams' amazing bat performance or Tim Curry as this kind of evil pollution demon. There's a lot going on. It's not a long movie. It's a very pointed, clear movie. There's not a lot of subtlety, but that's actually perfect. And so it's about a construction worker named Zach who, through a series of events, ends up being shrunk down to a tiny size, and he meets this fair forest fairy Krista, who is trying to explain to him how terrible it is that his construction company is chopping down all the trees in their forest. And through the chopping down of the trees, it has released this demon spirit, Tim Curry, into the world again that threatens to wipe out their entire existence, and they need to find a way to ward off his his specific threat as well as just the general encroachment. And then Zach has to return to being a human. There's a lot going on. Like I said, not a long movie. It gets right to the point. I was honestly more familiar with it. I think this is why I thought I had seen it. The trailer to it, or like the preview for it, appeared on the VHS of Home Alone.
Oh, okay.
Every year when I would watch Home Alone, there were two commercials. One was for Pepsi, and one was for FernGully, The Last Rainforest. And I watched them, and so I know like lines and scenes by heart, but I had never actually seen the movie. Turns out I got a pretty good sense of it from this, but FernGully, I think as we go up to getting ready for the new release coming of Avatar, there's going to be a lot of Avatar FernGully discourse happening, and get ready now by borrowing FernGully from EPL.
Nice. It's been a long time since I've watched FernGully.
Yeah.
It's funny because I was going to ask you, I was like, did you watch FernGully? Because we've got a new Avatar movie coming out, and where you're like, I gotta, let's see, like, were you kind of like, I got to compare these two, or?
Definitely that was part of it, that
Yeah.
knowing that there is this kind of cultural take on it that's like Avatar is just a remake of FernGully, or they're the same movie. I mean, one has Robin Williams in this incredible performance, as well as other voice actors, and like I say, Tim Curry. But I think like everyone's gonna have all these takes when Avatar comes out. You're gonna want to be ready to jump in there with FernGully.
So I got to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot here. After watching FernGully, would you say that Avatar essentially is just a remake of FernGully?
Okay, so here's the thing. I've never seen Avatar. So
Really?
really,
Oh my
I
God.
never have. I was gonna try to like hide that for as long as possible, but
Sorry.
that is now come out. I've never seen Avatar. I was never
Oh
really
boy.
yeah. So I can't really comment on that part of it, but I did enjoy FernGully.
Okay. So I'm going to give you some homework now.
Okay.
I think you have to watch Avatar. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that you're going to say Avatar is just essentially a live action remake of FernGully.
Okay.
When I first watched, sorry to go off on this Avatar thing, and visually the movie's stunning, but like I remember after I watched it, I was like, this is FernGully. I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah.
I think visually it's stunning, but it's just a rehash of FernGully in my opinion.
Part of what is challenging with watching something like FernGully or even Avatar now, like what we are hearing about, deforestation, or the way that society has impacted the natural world. We've known this for a long time, and FernGully is 30 years old. It's been out there. I don't know. I just never was interested in watching Avatar. Like I remember kind of when it was released and it was, on track, and it just became the top grossing movie of all time, and all this stuff about James Cameron and how he only delivers these like big epic movies, and I don't know, I just never inspired me to go and see it. And then once it was out of theaters, I was kind of like, well, would it look as good on a smaller screen? I don't know. So I guess now I have to watch Avatar. What have you been enjoying recently?
Yeah, so this is a title that I believe I briefly mentioned this. It was about a year ago or so, because it was, I believe, during our Thanksgiving episode last year. I'm actually recommending this week. It's a graphic novel. It's Batman 89. So this is actually my official Overdue Finds pick this week, since you can now borrow it from us. And I had mentioned it during our Thanksgiving episode as it was a comic that I was enjoying, that basically you could go to the newsstand to buy. But now that it's in graphic novel form, it's a lot more accessible for everybody. You don't have to go and buy 6 different issues of a comic to read it. So we actually have it as both as kind of like an ebook through Hoopla and as a physical graphic novel. So here's what's cool about it. So basically it's a short series. It's actually a continuation of the Michael Keaton and Tim Burton films from 1989 and the early 90s. So the series actually starts off following the events of the movie Batman Returns. So we get to see Gotham is once again a city in chaos, as it always is, thanks to some Joker-inspired villains. And they're kind of battling against some Batman-inspired vigilantes. So this, I don't want to give too much away here, but basically this is like kind of like the unofficial Batman Part 3. I know we got Batman Forever, but this really is a continuation of that Michael Keaton, Tim Burton storyline. We get to see, it's funny because if you watch the very first Batman movie, you see Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent, but that's really about it. But here we actually get to see, most comic book fans know that Harvey Dent eventually becomes Two-Face. So we get to see that in here, and along with a few other things too. So, even if you're not a big comic book fan, or maybe it's been a while since you've picked one up, but you're a fan of those movies, like I think a lot of people really love like that original Batman and Batman Returns. This is a fun one for you to pick up. It's relatively short. You can kind of read it all in one sitting, and you get kind of this movie kind of sequel that really never happened, and we wouldn't really be able to get today anyway. So that's what's really cool about not only comics but books as well, is it kind of gives us a chance to kind of go back and relive some of these things. So Batman 89, if you did enjoy those movies, which I think a lot of people did, go and check out that graphic novel. It's a fun read.
I like the idea of a movie film series continuing in another form. It just, I get this idea of having all of these like ribbons of story specific continuity, which I guess is what a lot of comics are, but having these different worlds kind of unfolding and different things happening.
Yeah, it's cool. And like I said, I mean, there's so many, like if you go to any comic book store, there's lots of different Batman series and, Deadpool and all these other kind of big characters that everybody's obviously familiar with. It's kind of hard, I think, for casual people just to jump in because there is so much out there. Whereas here you have, it's a 6-issue story. It's all in one collection. You can pick it up. You don't, need to know like a lot of background story or anything. Like most people are obviously familiar with those Tim Burton Batman movies anyway. So you can just pick it up, read it. It's a standalone story and enjoy it. So this one I find is a little bit more obviously accessible. And I think the more casual comic book reader or just casual pop culture fan will really enjoy it. So that's what I think is really cool about it. All right. So Marilyn Monroe. I should mention though that I should have mentioned this actually at the top of the episode. I'm not sure if we'll get there, or hopefully we won't really get into it, but just based on some of the content today's episode could contain some content that might not be suitable for all listeners. So if you're listening in the vehicle with any little ones, maybe save this episode for later, but I don't think we'll get there really, but you never know. But Caroline,
Yeah.
I believe you've got some fun facts about Marilyn Monroe that you want to share with our listeners.
Some more fun than others, that's for sure. But I did want to kind of talk a little bit about her biography before we got into talking about her. She was born in 1926, and I'm already like off on a tangent here, but this, she just seems like from such another era. It's just so hard to think that there's a path where she could still be alive. Marilyn Monroe could still be alive today in today's world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen in 1926, and she was raised partly by her mother, partly by neighbors. She was in the foster care system and spent some time in an orphanage. She married for the first time at age 16 to avoid going back into foster care or the orphanage system by marrying the son of a neighbor. During World War II, she became known as a pinup girl and tried to translate that into acting. It took several tries for her to get on contract with a movie studio, which was still using the contract system of production very much at the time. She studied acting, singing, dance, and movie making in general. And it wasn't until 1950 when she really had kind of some breakthrough roles, small roles in 2 acclaimed movies, All About Eve and The Asphalt Jungle. In 1953, she appeared in three movies: Niagara, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and How to Marry a Millionaire. The later two were two of the highest grossing movies of the year, both grossing over $5 million and becoming her biggest hits at the time. In December of 1953, she appeared on the cover and as the centerfold in the first issue of Playboy. She did not pose for the magazine, neither the cover nor the centerfold. They just reused older pictures of her, including the centerfold of her nude photography that had come out the early previous year and caused scandal. She eventually kind of leaned into that as the image and became known as a blonde bombshell and a sex symbol. In 1954, she married Joe DiMaggio, the famous baseball star, and starred in River of No Return, filmed here in Alberta. And she also filmed The 7 Year Itch, one of her biggest hits. She started her own production company following that movie because she was tired of getting her contract minimum scale pay and having no influence on her movie choices or acting choices within the movies. In 1956, she married Arthur Miller, the playwright. They divorced in 1961. She appeared in some of her biggest movies towards the end of her career, including Some Like It Hot and The Misfits, which was her final film from 1961, as well as the last film from Clark Gable. In 1962, May, she sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President, famously to then President JFK in New York. The next month had poor health and fighting with the studios about her health and her work, and rumors of drug use swirled around her and clouded her reputation in Hollywood, and she died on August 4th, 1962, under mysterious circumstances. It's been officially ruled a suicide, but some continue to believe that that was not actually what happened. So, a life that had a lot of challenges in it and ended quite unhappily.
Yeah, and it's yeah, this is such an interesting person, I guess, for us to be covering, like you said, really on our first kind of episode where we really do like a deep dive on, like, you know, one person's career. So you know, it's really interesting because she really is, you know, I was thinking about while watching Some Like It Hot, and, you know, she really is like one of the most recognizable people
Yeah.
of all time. Like if you think about it. So, I mean, I'm just curious, like, Caroline, for you, what associations do you have with her? Like when, you know, we talked about doing this episode, what really kind of, what are some of the very first things about Marilyn Monroe that came into your head?
I think what really shaped her for me is like that early to mid 90s retro revival. I think that I associate Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley with this sense of re not re-entering pop culture, because I don't think they ever truly left, but just this re-embracing of it as like vintage, and thinking of, you know, Marilyn in her 7 Year Itch dress, the white dress where she's standing on the subway grate, something like that. You would see that in stores, in images, on t-shirts, on it would be on that like metal sign stuff, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and you would buy that and then put it up somewhere. You know, clocks, decor, like home decor. It was just very much this sense of like person as commodity, and wrapped up in, I think, 50s nostalgia in a way that you saw with Elvis Presley, you saw with, the love of like those retro diner things, that 50s aesthetic coming through. And so I think that was definitely the first and strongest association I had, was of her as beautiful, sexy actress, model, using herself and her body, and it definitely was separate from her movies, almost to the point where, I mean, I remember the first time I watched All About Eve, did not know she was in it, and it's like, oh, there she is, and she's doing, she's great in this role. It's very small role, but like it's that kind of like, oh right, she was an actress, this is what she was doing this in service of. So that it was definitely a lot of the things that you would come to associate with Marilyn, like person as commodity, this kind of very strong, strict image, the separation between Norma Jean and Marilyn as well, but definitely coming out of that kind of nostalgia, time period nostalgia, more than an appreciation or recognition of her work.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat too. Like I said, I mean, for this episode, I watched my very first Marilyn Monroe movie, and she's one of those people that is just kind of, obviously, I mean, in our lifetime, she's just obviously always been there, and without needing to see any of her movies, you know of her.
Yeah.
And she just, to me, she just represents Hollywood in general. Like, if you go to Los Angeles and, you hit all these like tourist trap places, there's always seems to be some sort of, image of, there is, like you said, Caroline, that image of Marilyn from the 7-Year Itch, where, she's got the dress kind of blowing up, and it's just such an iconic look. Like, I mean, if we were to go, 100 years into the future, it's, there's probably not going to be, maybe images of, today's top actresses like, Scarlett Johansson or people like that. But that Marilyn Monroe image will still always be associated with Hollywood, and of course an entire era of film. And, it's kind of interesting, Caroline, because, you mentioned about, there's decor and clocks and, all this other stuff. Like, I don't think there's probably a 50s or 60s themed diner anywhere in the world that doesn't have some sort of like pin-up or picture of Marilyn Monroe on the wall. But yeah, like, she's just always been this, especially now for, as we look back at her, she's just like this iconic sex symbol. And every decade kind of seems to have, these different sex symbols. And, and it's, what's funny about it is, like, if you go back and you look at, let's go to the 1980s, for example, and, you see, somebody like, say, Suzanne Summers or Farrah Fawcett and everything. And, but, and a lot of people will look at those images and there'll be kind of jokes about, oh my God, that's so 80s and everything. But like Marilyn Monroe, there's not any of those comments. It's always just like, she just has this very kind of classic and timeless look with her. And it is kind of sad though. I mean, you touched on it with her death, and that now you also have these unfortunate conspiracy theories about her and how she died. Like, I mean, there's theories out there that, the Kennedys may have had her killed and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, just, that's actually one thing that I have found kind of interesting about doing research for this episode I think it's so important for people to go back and look at her actual work versus, her just being a sex symbol, and, enjoying her her actual acting, because she was an incredible actress.
Time has given a better understanding of her performances and the ability to kind of review them more critically, or seeing how they've held up over time, and a lot of them have, and many of her movies are more appreciated now than they were at the time. And some of this stuff just writes itself almost. This idea of, I found one quote that said she was one of the most photographed women in the world, and the cliche of, so many people have seen her and recognized her and know who she is, and yet so few people know the real person. And whether, the degree to which that was by design, and how much of it was her wanting to remain hidden and private, and how much of it was people making assumptions and using her for their own purposes, using her up to some degree. I think being able to see her on film and know what she was attempting with her movies, and her desire to take control of some of that. Definitely. I mean, it's only fairly recently. I think I would have seen scattershot throughout her career. And again, no one goes all into All About Eve, because it's a Marilyn Monroe movie. It's been recently that I've, made a more of an attempt to see some of her films, and, watching Niagara and the 7 Year Itch, which I saw for the first time a couple years ago. You're watching it and you're expecting it just to be that moment of Marilyn on the subway grate, or in Niagara, the shot of her. There's a shot. It's a famous scene of her just walking away down the street, and it's 30 seconds of her walking away, and you're just seeing her from behind. And 30 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but on film, it is an eternity. It's one of these things, like, if we had 30 seconds of dead air right now, it would like, and you're watching it, and you're just like, how much of this is she in on, and how much of this is she playing with the perception of, and how much agency does she have in this? And then, yeah, just the look of Niagara is fantastic. I walked away going like, oh my god, the color. I just wanted to talk about the use of color in Niagara with anyone who would listen, for quite a while after watching that movie. But I think that, like you said, you just kind of have an awareness of her, and an understanding, whether that's from her or the way that pop culture has taken her, and whether it's, I mean, I was probably honestly more familiar with Ginger Grant, the movie star from Gilligan's Island, who had a Marilyn Monroe type quality in her haircut and her outfits and her voice and her backstory, or the Material Girl music video by Madonna that uses the look of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, in that famous pink dress. She's there. You're enjoying her. It's you don't need to have watched these movies, but by not watching the movies, you're missing out on Marilyn the actress.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads us to the movies that we watched here.
That's it exactly. We each decided for this one we were going to watch one movie and share our reactions. Normally we keep these secret from each other when we do these picks, but this time we did confer a little just to make sure we were watching separate movies. But what movie did you pick? I think you've already mentioned it. And what did you think of it?
Yeah, so I watched the 1959 Billy Wilder film, Some Like It Hot. Have you seen this one before, Caroline?
I have, yes.
Okay, nice. So, I'm really glad this was my first Marilyn Monroe movie. So what was before I get into the movie, this is a movie, it's funny because I thought this movie was actually older than it actually was. And what I mean by that, so it was released in 1959, obviously, which is like over 60 years ago. The movie takes place in the 1920s, and I didn't think the movie came out in the 20s, and also it's black and white too. But meanwhile, you also had Marilyn Monroe movies coming out, being released in color at this time. So I thought that choice was interesting, but I read a little bit of trivia on it, and it sounded like they stuck with it being black and white, even though Marilyn Monroe, apparently in her contract, would only do movies in color. Because I believe the makeup that was used for Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis didn't come across very good in color. So they're like, let's just keep this thing in black and white. It's a little bit more true to the 1920s timeline in our movie. So I just thought that part was a little interesting. But for those of you who might not be familiar with it, obviously Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon play musicians who witness a mob hit. And basically these guys, they've used up all of their favors around town and burned as many bridges as they can. So they actually have a hard time getting out of the city to go on the run. They hear about an all-women's band who will be playing in Florida for the next 3 weeks, and they just happen to be looking for someone to play bass and saxophone, which is, of course, is what Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon's character play. They get the hilarious idea to dress up as women and join the band under new names, Josephine and Daphne. And so this is where Marilyn Monroe comes in. While with the band, they become close with lead singer and ukulele player Sugarcane Kowalczyk, who is, of course, played by Marilyn Monroe. And naturally, because of, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon dressing up as women, this movie is full of hijinks as Josephine and Daphne try to keep their cover, while you have kind of like the playboy Tony Curtis tries to make Sugar fall for him, while he's also happens to be playing as really a third character, as this like eccentric, Australian businessman who claims that he's part of the Shell fortune. And one of my favorite roles in the movie, actually, is this hilarious millionaire played by Joe E. Brown. He becomes absolutely smitten by Jack Lemmon's character, Daphne, and basically tries to make her fall in love with him. So this was actually a really fun movie, and I'm glad I watched it. Of course, I'm watching this movie, and of course, there's lots of comparisons to, obviously, like, we wouldn't have a movie, say, like Tootsie or Mrs. Doubtfire without Some Like It Hot. And of course, you've got the thing where, there's somebody who's like, there's a guy who falls in love with one of these other guys who's, of course, dressed up as a woman, and all the hijinks with that. And of course, you have the guys who, of course, being dressed up as women, they're like, oh, I can't believe these horrible men, like, they can't keep their hands off me, or these guys are such pigs, and how dare they treat me this way. And of course, they get to see what it's like with when the shoe's on the other foot. So I did find kind of towards the end, the movie I found like kind of like the third act to drag a little bit, but I mean, overall, this was a fun movie. You can pretty much put it on with anybody, and I think they'll really enjoy it. And so if you are kind of, maybe you're not like me, where you're not a big musical fan, there is some musical numbers in here, but it's not, I definitely wouldn't consider this movie a musical by any means. This was just a fun, light comedy. Really enjoyed it.
As you were talking, it reminded me of, I believe it was our last episode, the 1987 episode, where we talked about in the 80s there was kind of a phase where it's like, wouldn't it be hilarious if men took care of children? Yeah. And 3 Men and a Baby, Mr. Mom, Charles in Charge, like all these things. And this is kind of like this, like, wouldn't it be hilarious for men to be women and just dress up in a dress and makeup? And it doesn't need to have more of a like plot than that, but I think what you get with Billy Wilder is this kind of comedy element of it. And when we talked about doing this Marilyn episode, I don't know why, but you had to several times confess to having never seen a Marilyn Monroe movie. And every time the one people came back with was not even Some Like It Hot. And so I
Yeah.
don't know, like that happened multiple times. I said it to you, another team
Katie
member.
did.
Yeah, like this is it's definitely out there. And so I don't know if that's a thing about Marilyn or what just the movie's place in film history or the type of movie people think you might enjoy. I don't know what's coming through there, but there's definitely a really strong association with this movie.
And it's funny because doing some research on the movie itself, like this movie pops up on, a lot of like film registry lists where it's like, I was looking on IMDb and like at one point, I think in the 90s, it was, AFI listed it as the greatest comedy of all
That's
time.
why I
And
watched it. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So different lists like that. And I mean, even too, if you go on different websites and you look at reviews from it, a lot of people say the same thing. It's like, this is one of the greatest comedies of all time. It's got one of the best, endings to a movie and, different things like that. So, I definitely can see, like, I mean, it was very funny. I don't know if personally, I don't think I would probably name it as the greatest comedy of all time, but I can understand why people would rank it that high, though. It was definitely fun. So, Caroline, how about you? Which Marilyn Monroe movie did you watch?
Well, knowing that you were going with Some Like It Hot, I toyed with the idea of going with one of the dramas that she was in, and really tempted by The Misfits, which we have, and you can actually stream through, I believe, both Hoopla and Canopy from EPL. But I ended up going with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, starring Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell as two nightclub showgirl musician singers who have differing philosophies on how to uh, find the perfect man. For Marilyn Monroe's character of Lorelei Lee, you have to have your eye on the money. It has to be a rich man. You can fall in love with a rich man just as easily as you can a man with no money. So why not make it easier for your life and have the money? She is engaged to be married to Gus, her suitor. I can't really remember why, but they're going to France. She's going to France and on an ocean liner, and he can't go yet, so he sends along her musical partner Dorothy Shaw as her chaperone. And Dorothy, played by Jane Russell, we learn her philosophy is who cares if they've got money or not? All you need is a good looking guy to help pass the time. And whether he's Mr. Right or Mr. Right now doesn't really matter. You can have fun either way. So they show up on the boat and they're on there with the U.S. Olympic team is also traveling across to France, and we learn that see, I want to call her Marilyn. Lorelei's fiance has hired a private investigator to make sure she doesn't get into any trouble, because if she does, his father will insist that he call off the engagement. Well, she is not. I mean, she loves her fiance, but she's not going to, give up the opportunity to maybe make a few new acquaintances. And she soon befriends a wealthy diamond mine benefactor who innocently involves her in a scene that could be misinterpreted by someone taking an incriminating photograph, which is just what happens. And so then there's, you know, hijinks again to get the photograph back. Dorothy, meanwhile, has fallen in love with the private investigator, but he's kind of using her, and she's kind of using him, and everyone is kind of not sure about their feelings for each other. It culminates in Lorelai and Dorothy now in France, working in this nightclub. Marilyn Monroe does her Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend number. Then she is contacted by the police for reasons relating to a stolen tiara. Jane Russell now needs to pretend she is Marilyn Monroe's character in court and does the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend number as Marilyn, as Lorelai, as Dorothy. It and all ends, spoiler alert, with a double wedding. So everything ends with everyone happy and with the person they're supposed to be with. It was a fun movie. It's hard to describe because there are a lot of plots. Like you think the U.S. Olympic team plot is going to go somewhere, and then it really doesn't. They're just there to like have a musical number where Jane Russell is like stalking between the men as they're doing these exercises and their muscles are bulging, and then that's it. Then they're like, "Oh, you're actually training. You can't like pleasure me. Okay, well that's enough of that." And then they don't show up again until like later on. So all these things that kind of there are these threads. It's based on a stage play, again originally set in the 1920s, but loses that a little bit by being more contemporary. Released in 1953, the sets is filmed and released in color. The sets, the costumes, the dresses are gorgeous. All I wanted to do after was like live in this world of this stateroom on their ship and think about their amazing dresses and costumes. Gorgeous, fun. It is a musical, so there are songs that they sing on and off stage, but highly, highly recommend. It's about an hour and a half, and it is a fun time.
Nice. I was going to ask you because I was thinking about this like while I was watching Some Like It Hot. The scenes in that movie with Marilyn Monroe, like I know in Some Like It Hot myself personally, like when you're watching it, like when I was watching it, I was just like, this is why she's iconic. Like you can't take your eyes off of her. Like she's just, obviously she's gorgeous, but she just like, you know,
Yeah.
she just oozes charisma, I guess.
Yeah. She definitely has that star quality. The play is the original play that Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was based on was written as this kind of starring role for two women, and she and Jane Russell play off each other so well in the movie that it's not just, one's blonde and one's brunette and that's their differences. They have different approaches to their character, different attitudes. There's a scene where Marilyn is trying to wear a tiara as a necklace, and there's physical comedy in it. She gets stuck going through a window in a stateroom, and she is helped by this little boy who like stands under her, and then she wraps herself in a blanket so they can see her head, but like when her hand comes out, it's actually the boy's hand on there. There's like physical comedy, visual comedy. The script is funny, and definitely an ability to capture attention of the viewer whenever either of the characters are on screen, and when they're both on together, especially in the song and dance numbers.
Nice. So I got to ask you, is there another Marilyn Monroe movie, after kind of going through this and doing research for this episode, is there another Marilyn Monroe movie that maybe you're looking forward to watching?
Definitely do want to check out The Misfits. I also want to see How to Marry a Millionaire, which was her other 1953 movie. That one she's co-starring with Lauren Bacall in that one. Again, just I can be so easily swayed by beautiful visuals and the costume design in this. Some Like It Hot, I came across, well, it popped up in my life again recently. I was watching a documentary on Ori Kelly, who was the costume designer for that movie, and the documentary called Women He's Undressed, looks at just the costumes of this era in film, and there's just so much beauty in it. And so really, definitely want to check out How to Marry a Millionaire, and Bus Stop was another one that shows Marilyn in more of a dramatic role. And then check out, the Rocky Mountains in River of No Return.
Yeah, Misfits for me. I think I'm gonna definitely be making an effort to watch that one. So that could very well be a future Overdue find pick.
I look forward to it.
One, of course, as I mentioned at the top, one of the reasons that Marilyn Monroe is still making headlines right now is because of the new Netflix movie Blonde, starring Ana de Armas. So, Caroline, gotta ask you, this is a controversial movie.
Yeah.
People have very polarizing views, I think, on it.
Yeah.
I know you got a chance to watch it. I think I guilted you into watching it, maybe based on a tweet I sent out after I watched it.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the movie?
I don't really know what I think of it. So Blonde is based on a Joyce Carol Oates novel about Marilyn Monroe. So it's like at least two levels of fiction away from Marilyn Monroe and her actual life. So the challenge of watching it and knowing kind of what's true or not. Truth is always such an interesting concept in, biopics, and there's like fact and then there's truth, and are those always the same? There were elements of the movie that I thought, I mean, again, the costuming, the look and the effort that Ana de Armas put into having a physical likeness to Marilyn is stunning. And at times there are just shots of her on screen as Marilyn, often on screen as Marilyn on screen, that are just stunningly beautiful.
Like those Gentlemen Prefer Blonde scenes where they're watching it in a movie theater, you're just like, is that Ana de Armas or is that actually Marilyn Monroe?
Yeah, yeah, there are definitely times where, and I know that it was a controversial casting, and she had to kind of prove her ability to step into the role. I think that there are a lot of, I mean, in terms, I think the movie is like 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's not short, but no one's life is 2 hours and 40 minutes of content. And so there are definitely deliberate choices about what is included in the movie and what is not included. And the filmmaker, the director, has said that there are elements of it that he was just not interested in exploring. And so you don't see in the movie Marilyn, the studio mogul. She created her own production company. That's not anywhere in the movie. You see kind of touches of her childhood, but her first marriage is not included. Different things that are included or not, those are always choices. And so now you've got two layers of fiction wrapped up in choices about someone who we famously didn't always know a lot about. There are scenes. I did like the scene when Marilyn. So at this point in the movie, she's married to Joe DiMaggio, and she is at his like family home. I'm not sure whose it is, but it's like got like his family, and like there's these women there and families, and the men are watching sports, and there's kids running around, and she's just so out of place in that setting. And the immediate takeaway, because she's sitting there and she's got her Marilyn voice on, and her look and everything, is that she's a big Hollywood star and these like real people and she can't get in. But then thinking of her childhood, she never had that. She never grew up in a house that was like whatever house she was in that moment. That was just not her life experience. So of course, like, she has this awkward, uncomfortable, not knowing how to be, and people are judging her, and then it's like, well, she's Marilyn Monroe, and yet she's still being judged by all of the. It was just a very funny, sad, poignant scene, and I think there's the opportunity for moments like that in the movie. It's just a lot.
Like when that's, I know which scene you're talking about, where they're in the kitchen, all the women are in their big Italian family making food, and the one lady hands Marilyn Monroe an egg, and she's just like, oh, like, do I eat this? Yeah. Like, like she just didn't know what she's supposed to do with this egg. So yeah, that is kind of one of the there's not a lot to laugh with in that movie, obviously, but that was, I mean, I thought that part was kind of sweet slash funny too. But yeah, you do feel for her in that scene, just because really she's surrounded by just kind of like average people, and it's, I can't imagine, living that type of life where, you have all these eyes on you. Like, I couldn't help but, when I'm watching it, think of, like, just for comparison's sake, somebody like, say, Britney Spears, where just under this microscope and just, all these eyes on her all the time, and it's just, very, very hard for them to kind of probably adjust to, being out and everything like that. But, for the movie itself, though, this is an interesting movie, I was going to say, but, I can definitely understand the backlash online, because this movie it's like a series of traumatic events, and like you said, Caroline, it would have been really interesting to see that part where she was forming her own production company, and I believe she was probably the first woman to do that. But I mean, I think sometimes this is kind of one of those movies, I think, where it's like this was like made for essentially critics and to win awards, really. And I think, for the average person watching this, I've seen a lot of comments and stuff on social media. A lot of people are not enjoying this movie at all. This is a movie where, like you said, Caroline, visually, it's absolutely stunning. This is a great overall looking movie. It's, I definitely think it's like an achievement. However, I would put this in the list of movies that I only want to watch once. Like, I'm good with never going back and watching this movie again. Ana de Armas, definitely, she deserves all of the awards. Like, she absolutely incredible in this movie. So, if you're going to watch it for anything, obviously watch it for her performance. But Caroline, I don't know if you found this too. I found while watching this movie that I had like my phone up, and not that I wasn't paying attention, but there'd be all these little things that would happen in the movie, and I'm like Googling things as I'm watching it. Did you do the same thing?
Yeah, some in the movie, some after the movie, and then I like going to like Google and then seeing like other people having the same type of questions on this. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's not a movie. It that we have in our collection. It just came out and was on Netflix, so it's going to stream there. Who knows if it will ever have a physical release to be in our collection. So, I mean, my kind of takeaway is, if you're on the fence about watching it, why not try an actual Marilyn Monroe movie instead?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Bryce, before we get to our roundtable questions, can you let everyone know what we'll be chatting about on our next episode coming out on Friday, October 21st?
Yeah, so Caroline, do you know what I love about this time of the year?
Candy.
Candy is part of it, but we're in that spooky season.
Yes.
It's getting darker earlier, which is awesome. And we're in fall clothes and colors and everything. So, of course, Halloween's right around the corner. So we're going to be taking a look back at the classic family film Hocus Pocus and give our thoughts on the sequel, which just came out. So yeah, and we're also maybe going to share some of our picks for some of our favorite spooky Halloween movies. So we've given horror movie picks before, but that whole genre of spooky family films is so fun. So we're going to be taking a look back at some of those.
I'm really looking forward to it. This is definitely, as you say, the temperature's a little cooler, the air's a little crisper. It's a fun time of year. So our roundtable questions today, I guess it's less of a round table and more of just like a ping pong back and forth. But so Marilyn Monroe was celebrated in Elton John's original "The Candle in the Wind" song. Which artist would you most like to have memorialize you in song?
This was tough, but I went with Guns N' Roses. I would like to have some sort of like November Rain-esque power ballad created about me and my life, I guess.
Nice.
Slash out there in the prairie doing like a badass guitar solo. So
I can see it.
That's mine.
I can see it happening. Yeah.
How about you, Caroline?
Mine, I really went kind of meta on this and went with Neil Diamond. I mean, he already has Sweet Caroline, so just tweak a few of the words and it can go from being about Caroline Kennedy to Caroline Land, and then like the meta-ness of, Candle in the Wind going from being about Marilyn Monroe, being reworked to be about Princess Diana. I think, it's already a song people know and love, so just add in a few me-esque details, and I think he's got a hit.
Yeah. The video, there'd be, shots of you on a silhouette and everything, and yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
So our second question, I sent you a link to a BuzzFeed quiz. Which Marilyn Monroe character are you?
I did this quiz, and so I got, funny enough, from Some Like It Hot, Sugarcane Kowalczyk. So this is what it says about me. It says, you're a person who likes to have fun and party. Not really. Well, more the party part. And as a result, a lot of people hang out with you. You're also quite musically talented. Definitely not true. Whether that's singing or playing an instrument. So your Marilyn Monroe song, I Want to Be Loved by You. So it's not accurate at all, but hey, I'll take it.
See, BuzzFeed quizzes are either eerily accurate or way off.
Oh yeah, there was like nothing in the. It's funny because like when you're going through the choices, or going through the options, you're like, well, you can tell which movie they're going to refer to, and so I checked nothing about being musically, being able to play any instruments or singing or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
I think my favorite was the "Where would you like to go on vacation?" and Niagara was just one of the choices.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. How about you? Which character did you get?
Okay, so I don't even have the description because I was just like, this is ridiculous. I was Marilyn Monroe, that person. Like, and they just were like, yeah, you're not a character, you're just her. And I was like, well, this is not okay. So don't actually recommend doing that Marilyn Monroe character quiz. If anyone finds a good one that seems to be accurate, you can send that our way, podcast@epl.ca, because I'm still wanting to know what Marilyn character I am.
Well, we will still put a link to that BuzzFeed one that we did in today's show notes, though.
We will, just so other people can experience this as well. So as we mentioned, it's rare for us to have an episode that centers on just one person. Who should our next single person focused episode be about?
I hinted at this during our last episode, and actually during our last podcast brainstorming meeting. This was an episode idea that was kind of shortlisted. Elvis Presley. We, of course, just got the great movie Elvis, which came out. You can, by the way, you can put your name on a hold to borrow it from us, which I recommend doing. But between that movie, his great music. He had some cheesy movies, so I think it'd be fun for us to maybe review some of those. Elvis Presley, I think, would make for a great episode of Overdue Finds. How about you, Caroline?
Yeah, there were definitely times, specifically when I was watching Blonde, where I was thinking, gee, I wish we had gone with Elvis Presley in terms of our episode choice. But I'm glad for the discussion of her movies. I'm glad that we talked about Marilyn this week. I also strongly vote Elvis, but then also thought Celine Dion. I think there is just so much we could talk about from her epic career, from Quebec to Eurovision to the 90s power ballads, her life in Vegas, just so much we can talk about with Celine. So I think we should just, keep her in the back of our minds for when we need to come up with an episode.
So speaking of Celine Dion, I got to ask you, I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Have you heard of or seen the movie Aline?
I have heard of it, but not seen it.
So yeah, this is a movie that's like basically is Celine Dion's life, but like they don't use the name Celine Dion. Yeah. It's like Aline, but it's like the same story. It looks a little nuts. So that might be a pretty good future episode.
So we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so, we encourage you to subscribe so that you get all of our new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We love getting reviews. And most importantly, tell a friend about the show.
Don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. And if you want to share your Marilyn Monroe memories or thoughts with us, or even just suggest a future episode topic, if you think we should do that Elvis episode, email us at podcast@epl.ca or hit us up on Twitter by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.